Puerto Rico's relationship with the United States is a complicated topic. To understand Puerto Rico's current situation, a historical investigation of the island and its interactions with the Spanish Empire and the United States is required. Puerto Rico is not a state of the U.S., but rather a territory. How did this political situation arise? What historical events brought Puerto Rico into the sphere of the United States? And why did it not become a state or an independent nation? The first known inhabitants of Puerto Rico were the Taino people. This indigenous group was the group that Christopher Columbus and the Spanish encountered when they first arrived on the island. Under Spanish rule, the Taino culture was destroyed. The written history of the island began when Christopher Columbus arrived in 1493 during his second voyage. Evidently, the island had a decent amount of gold in its rivers, thus the name Puerto Rico, meaning rich port. As Spain began to become a major world player thanks to its vast new colonies in the America, the region took on a new political and economic situation. Under Spanish control, Puerto Rico began exporting luxury items such as sugarcane, coffee, and tobacco, and at this time began importing African slaves. The region of the Caribbean was no stranger to warfare, and so Puerto Rico became a military outpost, and two large forts were constructed named San Felipe del Morro and San Cristobal. The island's time as part of Spain obviously had a large impact on its political, cultural, and religious development. However, the crucial time to understand in order to answer why Puerto Rico is not a U.S. state is Puerto Rico's last moments as part of the Spanish Empire, as well as its acquisition by the United States after the Treaty of Paris concluded the 1898 Spanish-American War. In 1868, some Puerto Ricans from the town of Lares attempted a revolt but were defeated. However, this event was the beginning of national parties, the abolition of slavery, and autonomy. The Spanish-American War occurred in 1898 and was stirred up by American reactions to the Cuban uprising that lasted from 1895 to 1898. Americans were evidently worried about the instability of the conflict, and they were outraged by acts committed by Spain. The United States was also interested in the removal of European empires from the Americas. In 1898, a United States battleship exploded and sank in Havana Harbor. Regardless of how this happened, in April 1898, the United States acknowledged Cuban independence and Spain declared war on the United States, with the U.S. Congress voting for war a few days after. On May 1st, the U.S. Navy defeated a Spanish fleet in the Pacific, and U.S. troops landed in Cuba in June. The United States defeated the Army garrisons, and on July 3rd, the U.S. Navy defeated the Spanish Caribbean Squadron. A ceasefire was signed on August 12th, and the war was officially ended with the Treaty of Paris on December 10th. Spain was forced to guarantee Cuba's independence, as well as cede Guam and Puerto Rico to the U.S. Thus, Spain sold Puerto Rico to the U.S. for $20 million. Steps to incorporate Puerto Rico into the United States were not taken immediately. In a 1901 United States Supreme Court ruling, Justice White stated that, in a legal sense, Puerto Rico's relationship to the United States was, quote, foreign in a domestic sense. The United States Congress approved a new constitution for the island, and its inhabitants became full United States citizens in 1917. Around the time of World War II, calls for more autonomy for Puerto Rico resulted in President Harry Truman installing a native-born governor in 1946. Shortly after, Puerto Rican residents gained the right to elect their own governor, and in 1952, Congress approved a constitution that essentially gave Puerto Rico more local control. But let us now take a look at some discussion about U.S. policy at the time and why Puerto Rico did not become a state. Many experts have presented a variety of reasons. One such idea is that the United States was interested in asserting dominance in the Americas as well as removing European powers from the area. It has also been proposed that there was not a lot of political pressure on the U.S. government to offer Puerto Rico statehood or independence. It has additionally been posited that there was a worry at the time that the United States would be handicapped if it were unable to obtain territories. The European powers were busy building colonial empires and colonizing large swaths of the Americas, Africa, and Asia, although Spain's time as a world power was running out. Another theory is that the United States government saw Cuba as the main target for expansion and as a strategic location in the Caribbean. Being so close to the United States and located in an important part of the Caribbean, acquiring Puerto Rico may have been seen as a way to protect American military interests. Yorel Melende Badillo, who is a professor of Puerto Rican, Caribbean, and Latin American history at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, has stated that, quote, by 1898 or late 1897, Cubans understood that they were going to win the war for independence against Spain, and it's in that context that the United States intervened. He stated that he believes that Puerto Rico today is a colonial possession of the United States and that discriminatory beliefs about Puerto Rico's ability to govern itself are still present. Another theory is that the United States was mainly interested in Cuba and obtaining Puerto Rico was just a secondary conclusion. This conclusion seems to be supported by the actions of the United States during the 1898 Spanish-American War, such as the initial actions of the war, where the United States forces attacked Spanish troops and positions in and around Cuba. Furthermore, the United States' home front sympathies toward the Cuban cause further support this claim. Some have stated that the reluctance of Congress to make Puerto Rico a state is currently affected by concerns about spending as well as the voting implications. Puerto Rico would be left-leaning, which likely would vote for Democrats. Thus, if Puerto Rico became a state, Republicans would be putting themselves at a disadvantage. Having 2 extra Democrats in the United States Senate would most likely be the strongest impact statehood could bring, but presidential elections could be altered. These topics assume that Puerto Ricans support statehood, but said support for the idea is not unanimous. This is apparent from the results of the 2020 referendum. Support among Puerto Ricans for Puerto Rico becoming a state is evidently divided, though it does not appear by much. In said non-binding 2020 referendum, 52% of voters supported statehood, while 47% opposed it. It does not yet seem clear what effects these referendums will have. Puerto Rico has often been at the crossroads of the history of the Americas. The arrival of the Spanish and their subsequent takeover of the island ended an era of indigenous culture and brought with it an era of slavery and new economic markets. The island would be a part of the Spanish Empire and would be economically, culturally, and politically connected with other parts of it. The vast majority of Puerto Rico's time as a part of written history was under Spain. Political actions on the island created a unique situation prior to its acquisition by the United States, and ultimately, the Spanish-American War of 1898 and the subsequent American victory led to Puerto Rico becoming a U.S. territory. It has been claimed by some that the United States' involvement in this conflict was due to its interest in the situation taking place in Cuba, and that the consequence of Puerto Rico being acquired by the United States was a secondary consequence. Ultimately, the people of Puerto Rico became United States citizens in 1917 and obtained more local control in 1952. Experts have presented numerous possible reasons why Puerto Rico is not a state, and many of those reasons may still stand today, such as the implications of adding new senators and representatives. Such political changes could potentially become the deciding factor in the future of the United States political landscape, if they were to occur. Puerto Ricans themselves may be divided on the issue if we are to take referendums as an indicator. Recent referendums suggest that Puerto Ricans may want the islands to become a U.S. state, but only time will tell what these referendums will mean for a potential path to statehood.